Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast, The Engineer Whisperer. Welcome back. And today I have a special guest. Carlos, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here.
I'm super excited. We have been trying to get you on the podcast for a while now. So this is super special. Thanks for being here.
Now I feel like a celebrity. Thank you.
And as we begin, give us just a brief intro about you, who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Carlos Blanco. I'm currently the senior manager for communication subsystems in the Lunar Permanence Business Unit of Blue Origin. So what that really means in a simple version is that all of the communication systems for all of the lunar vehicles that Blue Origin is developing are under my responsibility. I have the teams that are designing them and developing them.
Wow, that sounds super cool. Well, I invited you here today because as we were communicating regarding the podcast topic, you said something that caught my attention, and I want to unpackage that. You said you would be willing to talk about your journey to your dream job. So we are here today to hear more about that journey and about your dream job. So maybe the first question I'll start with, where did the journey begin?
Honestly, the journey started when I was about 4 years old in Puerto Rico. So that's where I was born. We were there till I was 10. And I'm pretty sure that it was around 4 years old because I found that my mother had kept like letters to Santa and some other letters from around that age. And they all were talking about and interested in the exact same thing. So, as far as I can tell, it all started when I was 4 years old in Puerto Rico. And the dream was to become an astronaut. So that basically pointed me towards space and space exploration as the place I wanted to be.
Do you remember at a young age what inspired you? Did you talk to
Yeah,
someone? Did you read something?
no, I mean, yes, but I read and not talking to somebody. There wasn't really anybody that was like a influence in Puerto Rico when I was a child in the late 70s. Hispanic astronauts were didn't exist, and it would be a long time before there would be any. So no, it was really inspired by Star Trek, the original series. So I'm putting it out there. I'm a huge Star Trek fan and a big time science fiction nerd. And it's been a lifelong thing. And the other thing was reading on the history of spaceflight and NASA. So I like just devoured all the history of NASA, read up on all the biographies of the Mercury 7, the
Wow.
astronauts that came through Gemini, and then the Apollo astronauts. I lost track around the shuttle era just because the crews started to get so big that it wasn't so simple to keep track of all the different astronauts. But at least up to Apollo, I could tell you off the top of my head like the basic biographies of most of the astronauts.
So wait a minute. You're 4, 5, 6 years old. You're just starting to read. So you ask your parents to give you
Yeah.
astronaut books, not those easy reading books that we have. You wanted to read the hard stuff
Oh
and
yeah.
very
Yeah.
specific. So
Yeah.
your parents must have been on board then, totally supportive.
Uh, I mean, yes and no. I mean, they were supportive in insofar as they let me get the books. They definitely I benefited from having advanced reading skills, so that helped me with the more complex books. And so they got me the books that I wanted. But I think deep down, my parents were hoping that I would grow out of it. It never happened, but I think they were hoping I would grow out of it.
Well, but they didn't smash the dream either. I think that's
No, not in so many words. I mean, they did at least make me aware of the actual hurdles and obstacles along the way because again, from the late 70s to the early 80s, the idea of Hispanic astronauts was, kind of not a thing. And so it didn't seem like there was a lot of opportunity for that to happen. And they just wanted me to be aware of, there are some potential obstacles. And my response to that was digging into the biographies of the astronauts. I kind of created for myself a roadmap, and assume that if I could emulate the early astronauts and their careers, then I had a pretty good shot at getting there. Assuming that racism basically would not be the obstacle, right? Um, if you had all the other qualifications, and as long as that wasn't a problem, then you should be able to make it. So I basically created a checklist for myself at a very young age of all the things I needed to do to get to my goal.
How fascinating. I mean, I often say giving the kids, and not just kids, but adults too, as leaders to your team, the obstacles, um, it's it's actually not hindering them. It's it's creating what you have just said in very inspiringly said it. Eh, we figure out a way to get
Yes.
where we want to go and
Yeah.
we're just more aware of the obstacles and then we find a way to solve for those obstacles at any age.
Yes.
Well,
I've
this
since developed a more a softer approach than my parents, because my parents are more of a you figure it out because they didn't know. I've since learned and adapted that with both my kids and my teams, where I can give some guidance, but I won't give you the answers to the questions. You know, I might point you in certain directions and kind of try to nudge people to figure things out, um, but never give the answers and never bias the answer either. You know, just because I think it should be this way doesn't
yes.
mean that's the only way.
Yes, yes. Wow, that's a wonderful leadership skill, Carlos. Let me just say it right now. But now I know where it's coming from. I think this is even more impressive because once we live it through our life, we implement it in our lives, then it becomes not just a skill but a talent that we naturally flow and give to others. All right, so c- continue with the journey. So you were around 4, then you said around 9, 10 you moved.
Yep.
So how did you keep up with the dream?
So that was honestly, that was, I would say, is my tether because moving to the US was very difficult. Um, Although I was very lucky that I was in a private school that had a English immersion program so that I was able to come to the States with fluency in English, could read it, could write it, could speak it. I did not have the pronunciation skills. And when I arrived here around 86, 87, I met a lot of discrimination on the basis of just my accent. And so I spent a portion of my childhood, since I made it to the States, in kind of turning my back on my own culture and my own heritage, and trying to be more American, which is why I learned to pronounce the way that I do English, because I worked really hard to basically eradicate as much as I could my Spanish accent. But my dream of being an astronaut was the one thing that didn't disappear, and it carried me through those difficult times. It was the thing that I held on to. So I continued basically. I had to have certain grades. I was aiming for college. And since the vast majority of the early astronauts were all engineers, then that became the reason why I became an engineer. I was like, I must become an engineer because they were engineers. Therefore, I have to be an engineer, which became a source of contention between my parents and school teachers and whatnot because I struggled with math. As I went into the higher levels of math, I struggled more and more. The abstract nature of higher mathematics really just it was very difficult for my brain to wrap itself around. You know, solve for x. I don't understand. This is an x and a y. I don't. What are these things? What do they represent? So I had a lot of people who told me that probably was a terrible idea for me to go into engineering school, given that engineers are like steeped in mathematics. And everybody said, sure, you're really good at science, but you are not so good in math, and you need both. But I was determined. I was like, it's going to happen. It must happen. Um, and the other element of that checklist that I was determined was serving in the military, since the majority of the astronauts were all pilots, fighter pilots, test pilots. So that was on my checklist too. I must become a pilot. That was unfortunately the one thing that I could not achieve.
Could you give us a little bit more details?
Oh, sorry. I stopped because I didn't want to just like take over the
No.
conversation.
No, no, because I would say, well, what made you?
Yeah, so biology basically was my stumbling block on being a pilot, and that is unfortunately the one thing you can't overcome. So I had very bad eyesight, and I have very bad motion sickness, and so those are basically two flat out disqualifiers for pilots. You know, you can't see, and you're gonna throw up. That's just not gonna work. So I had to give up on being a military pilot as much as I wanted to do that. So by then, you know, the shuttle era, it's really in full swing. So it's like, okay, there are other routes to becoming
Yeah.
an astronaut. You know, mission specialists don't have to be pilots. And mission specialists were the ones who would go do the EVA as a spacewalk. So it's like, that might
Mm,
should be a better job than the person flying the shuttle. So I just adjusted my strategy. I held on to the engineering part, and the goal was then to um, go work in space because a lot of the mission specialists were people who, in some instances, were already working in NASA as engineers, and then from there they kind of applied into the program. And so I pivoted from pilot astronaut as a goal to sort of engineer astronaut mission specialist,
hmm.
which is around also the same time where for my love of Star Trek went from wanting to be the captain to being the engineer on the ship. So Scotty and
I
Geordi
love it.
LaForge suddenly became my heroes. Like I'd rather engineer and run and fix the ship. So that was kind of the shift and that was around probably middle school to high school transition.
Wow. I mean, I actually wanted to ask you, kind of put us from a timeline perspective, and you said middle school, high school. I mean, these are the defining years of our, we figure out our identity, kind of where we belong, who do we want to be. And then, so you mentioned that your parents and some of your teachers were not very supportive in you going into engineering and so my question is, how did you overcome that, well, that obstacle? Because it can be very lonely, just from my
Mhm.
experience, when you don't have, those who supposed to be supportive you are supporting you are not supporting you. So did you find other supporters? How did you overcome um, that period in your life?
That's an excellent question. And to be honest, I overcame it through just sheer will and stubbornness. I reached the point, especially once I got to college, where I decided that I was going to show everybody how wrong they were. And so just pig-headed stubbornness. I will not quit until I get this degree in my hand. I wanted to study aerospace engineering, and then the university that I wound up studying at didn't have aerospace, so they had mechanical engineering. So I was like, okay, fine, mechanical engineering. It's very close, but I was determined. I was like, I don't care how long this is going to take me. I will walk out of here with this degree. And I had one relative, an uncle of mine, who actually gave me the pep talk that I needed when I was the most doubting in my path. And he said, it's not a race. What matters is getting there,
Yeah,
finishing,
yeah,
not when you finish,
yeah,
just that you finished. And
yeah.
that was the thing that I needed to kind of keep
Mm,
going and then finish out my studies. But it was very difficult. I mean, it was already a difficult life for me because I was accelerated since elementary school. So I was like, to give you an idea, I started high school at 12. I graduated high school when I was 16 years old. So my formative teens that when
wow.
most people are figuring out their identity, like you said, most people are doing that in middle school, high school. I did
Yes.
that in college on my own, surrounded by a bunch of people who were much older than me. I had roommates who like said, oh, you're like Doogie Howser, and you know So it was already difficult enough to navigate the world when I was trying to pretend to be the age of everybody else. So usually
Yeah.
kids that were 2 years older than me. And
Yes.
then on top of that, pursuing a dream that for the most people that I was surrounded by in South Florida where I was living, that wasn't really most people didn't have that dream, that wasn't steeped in aerospace or space, and so
Yeah.
this crazy kid with wanting to be an astronaut was just kind of like nobody knew what to do with me.
Mm. Carlos, um, did you move away? So let me ask some curious questions. Did you move away from home to go to college? Like, or did you live at home and then commuted to college?
I would say that I moved away, but it's kind of a relative thing depending on your perspective. The school was in Miami. My parents were living in Broward County, so I was at best an hour away from home. So
Okay.
it's like I'm away from home, but I'm not.
Okay, okay. Well, okay. So you were kind of you were out of the house
Yeah,
though.
I was definitely
Okay,
out
you
of
were out
house.
of the house. So again, you're out of the house in this new environment where, older um students
Mhm.
and then you have this big dream. So my other curious question is, did you dare to share the dream with the people you lived with and the other students and with the professors that you met in college, or were you holding it all in?
Um, for the most part, I had by that point in my life learned to keep things close to myself, just because generally speaking, there was never a receptive audience.
Mm,
And so the most that my roommates knew about me was that he's a Star Trek nerd because I had Star Trek posters all over my dormitory, and not like character posters. I had like the cutaways of the ship. So again,
yes.
engineer. I was already thinking engineering. How's the ship put together? How does
Yeah.
it work? Um, and I shared with some of my professors about wanting to become an engineer because I was on the engineering track, so they kind of knew about it. And then when I did make some close friendships, those people then were brought into the secret world.
Okay.
Um, but otherwise, most people just knew that I was this Star Trek nerd who wanted to become an engineer, and that was about it.
Okay. Well, I asked that question because uh, it's hard. I mean, as I was growing up, for me, similarly, it was hard to share my dream with people because I kept kind of, how to say it in English, like doors kept closing in front of
Closing,
me. Like
yeah,
people would just like close up and like I have no idea what you're talking about, and almost I learned now later, reflecting, that it's almost a self-preserving behavior on others' part because they want to help, but they don't know how to help because they didn't understand me. Maybe this was in your world too, is just them, they closed down so that they won't hurt themselves, start questioning of kind of, is their life okay and why don't I understand it person. So all these other psychological sides, but yeah, so you know sharing our dream with others, with those that now we trust, and it's not even can they help us, is can they be receptive enough to hear us, and again, not close the door on us, but just ask questions and kind of not shut us down, is very important in our lives. So I'm happy that you found some people, even if
yes,
it's one or two. I mean, you start with one and two,
yeah,
and then
go from
find
there.
more, yeah, and then
Yeah,
find more people. So I want to just point this out, how amazing that you have found some people to share your dream with, because then it's almost like once it gets out of ourselves, then it starts to and then this feeling of, okay, this is a reality, this will be a reality, just expands. So
hmm
did that happen to you?
it not quite, but yes, I do understand what you're saying. I've experienced it more through my children than in my own personal life, because everything that you said is how I engage with my kids. on their journey and when they've told me about their dreams, then I do everything that I can to be receptive and ask questions and encouraging, and never have an opinion one way or the other because it's their life, not mine. And so whatever their dream is, then that's their dream.
Mhm.
And the only thing I've ever asked of them is to make sure that they put their heart and soul into whatever it is that they're going to do. Never sleepwalk through life, never just kind of shuffle along and just do the bare minimum, but to try their best at whatever it is that they're going to do.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I've told them to just choose their path and choose what's going to make them happy. Um, I know from my own experience that if I had just at least been told that, that would have been enough for me. Just for somebody to say, "Hey, I don't understand this dream of yours, but if that's what's going to make you happy, go for it. Go do that thing." There's always well-meaning people, but oftentimes they, because they don't have the right tools, they sometimes do more harm than good. I had a
Yes.
professor in my freshman year, and I started to develop really good writing skills. And I had not had those in middle school or high school, but in college, it started to blossom and come out. And I wrote a paper, and apparently it was so well written that he wrote in the back of the paper because he was aware I shared with him that I was struggling with the math classes and the
Uh-huh.
engineering classes. He wrote in the back of the paper, "This is really great. We should talk again about your choice of career path." And so, well-meaning,
Yes.
but also discouraging. And
Yes.
and the hilarious part about it, which is why it probably stuck in my head all these years, is that I literally wrote that paper like at the last possible moment because I had completely forgotten it was due. I had a classmate who told me it was due on the morning of the day it was due. And so I ran off, found the computer, and just started writing out this thing just to get it turned in. And my expectation was this is going to be maybe a D paper, but
Just to
I
get
really
you through, that's what
I
I'm
just got to
hearing.
get
You
through. I
just
just have to get credit for having turned in the assignment. And so it was just massive amounts of just, arm waving and just making stuff up and, just really not great work. And the professor wrote, "Great, great writing. I loved it." I've had a few experiences like that with papers that I wrote in school, in different classes where it was last minute things. For me, it was just terrible work, and everybody was just raving about the writing.
well, I mean, what does that tell you though? Let me just ask that. With with now an adult point of view, what do you think that was?
Well, I mean, it definitely pointed to a skill and a talent that um, I think in retrospect, needed to be nurtured and perhaps pursued, and could have led down different pathways.
Yeah.
Um, the irony is that if you could take me from then and transport me in time to today, where there are more very different pathways to getting to be an astronaut,
Mm-hmm.
I might have been more receptive to those inputs from those people because now there are podcasters
Yeah.
that are going into space. There are podcasters who are having these amazing experiences, meeting all the movers and shakers in the space industry, or writers and all sorts of people who are not in what used to be the traditional pathway to space
Yeah.
that are now finding a pathway to space. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it would have maybe potentially opened the door to another possibility, but back then, the pathway to space was a very rigid, very
Narrow.
narrow pathway, and you really couldn't deviate from that pathway.
Yes.
And so I wasn't receptive to any other idea because the goal of becoming an astronaut was all encompassing, all consuming. I must become this
Yeah.
or nothing else. And so I wasn't particularly receptive for that reason.
Yeah, you didn't switch to an English major. That's what I'm
I did
hearing.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, but having the opportunity to get the feedback of, in a way, what I heard that you've done is almost take the whole risk averseness out of writing, and it's last minute, just when I get through it. So I'm gonna take all my doubts away, and then just gonna, write without judgment, without is this good or bad, or overthinking it. You just kind of let go of all those critical talks, self talks that we all have, and like, I just need to get this done, and then you created something that impressed others. So maybe remember that in those moments when you just when you let go of your self judgment, then what you produce is something fascinating. All
That
right.
is a very powerful comment because I was attempting to write a fiction novel since middle school. And I have never gotten past the first chapter because I am my worst editor and my worst critic. And so I have rewritten and rewritten and rewritten until I eventually just gave up. But I never ever got past the first chapter just because I found it wanting and lacking, and I would start over.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. So maybe with this podcast, I want to encourage you to pick it up again, to start over, start fresh with a clean slate, and just write like you wrote that paper, where it's just to get through, and then put it all in, because you have it in there. It's not me, it's the professor who said it, and you repeated it a few times. So you have that skill. It might even be a talent. Just never gave it the opportunity to blossom. So it's never too late, I guess what I'm saying.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So, take us to, I mean, let's continue with the journey. So you you got to university, you're studying engineering, and you're like, no, I'm gonna finish. I'm gonna get this done. So did you get it done?
I did. It took me twice as long as most people. So instead of the 4 year program, I was on the 8 year program. I had a running joke with some of my friends that I was the only student who was tenured just because I had been there so long.
Yeah.
My school went through a growth process, and so I was one of the few students on campus who remember what the school looked like before all the construction. Um, and by the time I graduated, I had developed this joke. I have a tendency towards self-deprecating humor, but I had developed this joke that they basically gave me my degree because it was threatening the school's ABET accreditation. To have this student lingering around, like, is he ever going to finish?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, go away. Just, but yeah, I did finally finish. And when I walked at commencement, um, I knew so many people, so many professors and administrators and staff that everybody's stopping me for hugs. It held up the line. So I had students behind me going, "Hey, could you like move it along here?" Um, but yeah, I did eventually get my degree. Did eventually graduate with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. So I did accomplish what everybody said I wouldn't be able to accomplish, and so I checked that box and continued on my journey. Um, and another part that was is sort of a roundabout way to get to my path. My studies, or during the time that I was studying, I did a lot of co-op and internships with the phone companies, so telecommunications. So I didn't do any aerospace companies or anything like that. And so the first job offers that I had out of the gate coming out of school were telecommunications jobs, which I
Mhm.
didn't want, but I also didn't want to not work. So I took an offer, and I specifically took an offer in Houston with the intended purpose. I had this like grand plan. I
Yeah.
would go to work, I'd start making some money, and then I was going to go to graduate school in Houston
Yeah.
and look for a professor doing research with the Johnson Space Center. I would go join that research program and do my best to try to be noticed so that then an application to NASA would surely follow from there, and then I could go work for NASA. So this like very detailed plan in my head.
Sounds very logical too, Carlos. Let me just
Oh
say it.
yes, Didn't happen that way at all. I was in Houston for 3 months, and the Boeing company was doing a career fair in the Clear Lake area down by the Johnson Space Center because they needed to hire a massive amount of people to support the International Space Station program. So grab a bunch of copies of my resume, dressed up in a suit, drove all the way down to Clear Lake. And this is the time before Google Maps. So I had to like print out
Oh,
directions route by route because I had never been out there
yes.
and made my way out there, spoke to every person, every hiring manager that would talk to me. And I got 2 interviews out of that. I I did well enough in the interviews that I actually got offers, and actually very funny. I wound up with two job offers, and I wound up getting a very angry call from Boeing's HR because they thought I was competing the job offers against each other to try to get more money.
Oh.
And the HR person was very, very mad at me. Like, we are not going to give you more money. I literally told that person, look, I don't care how much money you pay me. I just want to work in space. I'm not fighting here for more dollars. I just want the job.
Mm.
So 3 months after arriving in Houston, I switched jobs from telecommunications to the Boeing company in aerospace and began working on the space station program. So and took some time, but I actually managed to start working in the space program that I had always dreamed of doing.
Well, 3 months. I mean, Carlos, that is almost like peanuts moments in someone's career. I mean, it takes 3 months to to start a job from applying, interviewing, and going through the paperwork. So I want to say just for a minute, I mean, applauding you that was amazing. Amazing that you decided to go and take the job in Houston, even though, as you said, it was in telecommunication, because you had to be there in order to then go to this Boeing job fair. So, um, for all of the listeners who are tuning in, sometimes the path is not so straight, and
Mhm.
you have to go to the left or to the right to then end up where you want to go. So this is
Yes,
another great example of your direction, even detours like for you Houston, um, fit in because you knew the direction, and you were flexible enough to say, okay, yeah, I can take this detour because it's not about the rigid path, it's about the direction that is clear, and I know what that is. So that's the difference between a path and a
yes.
direction.
Yes, 100%. I tell students that I've worked with at the Hispanic conferences at SHIP or Great Minds in STEM. I tell them something along those very lines, right? That the path isn't always straight. It can sometimes wander all over the place. It can kind of look like this little snaky thing, and you might despair that you're never going to reach your destination. But if you keep your eye on the end goal, then it doesn't have to be a straight line. It can kind of go all over the place.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of students out there that I've encountered that they're afraid that they're not going to get to where they want to get to because they think there has to be a very linear progression. So I talk to
Yes.
students in community college that think that's going to taint them. People are going to look at them badly because they're coming from community college or all these other things, and it's like the ultimate ultimately what I've told a lot of students is it doesn't matter once you have your degree or once you have the job or whatever. Nobody asks, how did you get here? Did you follow a straight line? How long did it take you? Nobody asks these things. They just
Well, because we know that maybe, okay, maybe a very small percentage of people had that straight line. But most people, I'm gonna say over 90% of the people are like you and me. I went through a community college. My path to my dream to graduate, it's not straight. That's for another time to
that's
discuss.
another day.
Um, but yes, I think that, I mean, reality is when you talk to people, nobody's line was as straight as they thought it would be. We
Yeah.
all had some detours, something happened because that's how life is. So I'm happy that you're sharing this with students, and it's important that we share. This is this podcast's goal as well, is to share these our experiences, because the path is not straight.
Mm.
You can have the best plan, just like you. I'm gonna go do this, and then from there here, and then you end up at Boeing. So I want to fit it in though, because so you're at Boeing. Tell me before we move on to what happened afterwards, is what's the mindset now that you are working for one of the leading aerospace companies in the world, um, and wasn't your plan. What was your mindset that you entered and you started that job?
I honestly spent, just months and months and months, and most of my time that I was in Houston working for Boeing, routinely pinching myself was I could not believe where I was and what I was doing. I started out working in the simulation lab, and we'd have all this equipment that was an analog of what was flying in space, and just like looking at this equipment, knowing that there was something like its big brother was going to fly in space, and I would just be like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Yeah.
I switched jobs. I went to work for the communications team and did mission support. So I would sit in the mission back room for the flight controllers. So I wasn't a flight controller, but supporting the flight controllers. So I had my little we all had our tables that was analogous to the flight controller. So I had real-time telemetry displays of the International Space Station and had a headset, and I'm listening to the astronauts and the spacewalks and the construction of the space station in real time, and reminding myself I am actually a
Wow.
witness to and a part of history in the making. And it's
Yeah.
just like just pinching myself, like I cannot believe that I'm here. I would look at my badge, like, yes, you are. That's you, and it says Boeing, and you're here, and you're in mission control at Building 30 at the Johnson Space Center. Just oh my God.
Yeah.
So it was just everything. Every day was something that I was just in awe of what I was, able to do and what I was experiencing. I got to meet astronauts, sit in on mission reviews with flight controllers and flight directors. I think once or twice I actually got to go into the flight control room in the middle of a mission to chat with the flight director about something. It was just like surreal, living that experience. And in turn, my family kind of came around and they said, "Wow, you have been talking about this since you were a little kid, and you did it. You accomplished what you said you were going to do." Whereas most people, and that's not a dig against anybody, but most people, oh, I want to be a fireman, and then eventually they go do something else. I want to be this, and then they go do something else. People
Yeah.
routinely change their minds because a lot of what you think you're going to do as a child is just a child's idea of the world.
Yeah.
And I stuck through it the whole way through and actually reached the point that I was aiming for. So yeah, it was a perpetual um, sort of dream job, just waking up every morning and like wow, am I actually doing this? Like, yeah, I am actually doing this. This is insane.
I can feel the excitement in your voice right now. I can see your body language, and yeah, I can. I can't actually imagine that feeling. I have my own, but I won't won't pretend that I know, because you fought your way through all those years to get where you are, and you know what you went through, and I just want to celebrate with you and that wonderful feeling that you are expressing. So, Carlos, as we're getting close to the end of this podcast, oh, although I have so many more questions, um,
Save it for part two.
yes, part two. What I want to ask you is, for those who are maybe just starting um, on a dream, what would you tell them? What would you tell yourself as a 4-year-old who is dreaming about and has this dream, and and again, the people around you didn't understand you. So what would you say to those people who have a dream now, and then to your 4-year-old, with with all the knowledge that you know now, and who went through the experience, the journey, to close us out?
I would say to both because of the thing I would say is the exact same thing, whether it was to my 4-year-old self or to somebody today with a dream, and that is hold on to your dreams. Um, if you pursue your dreams, if you follow your passion, you are always going to be happy. You're not going to regret the actions that you take. And if you find yourself fortunate enough to actually be able to do professionally that which is your passion and that thing that is your dream, it will never feel like work. Um, I back when I was at Boy and even now at Blue Origin, I sometimes feel like I owe them money
Yeah,
to be able to do what I do, as
yeah,
opposed to they owe me money.
yeah,
And that's don't for the listeners on the podcast, that doesn't mean I don't want my paycheck. But it's that sense that I'm getting to do what I've always wanted to do, and it's a privilege. And so that I would say that to people, for everybody to hold on to their dreams, not give up on their dreams, not give up on their passions, um, and follow them. The path won't be straight, but if you hold on to those things, you will still eventually get there.
yes, yes. And eventually you're gonna find people who gonna you're gonna share your dream with, and as you shared with us, who will be along your side, to support you. They won't do the work for you, so let me just be clear. You still have to put in the work and the effort, just like you did, Carlos, just like I did. But they're gonna be there to give you those pep talks, give you those in those moments when you feel the lowest, to lift you up, to remind you of your dream, to remind you of the faith that you have inside of you, and then remind you that you believe in yourself.
Yes.
Well, Carlos, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for sharing your journey with us. I I am inspired, super inspired. So I know that those who are listening gonna get something out of it as well, out of this conversation. So again, thank you very much for sitting down with me today.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.